Hey everyone, I am Jacob Winograd. I'm the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute. Very excited to be with you guys tonight. I am joined by two of my fellow, not co-hosts for my show, but fellow hosts here at the Christians for Liberty Network, Kerry Baldwin and Gregory Baus of the Reformed Libertarians podcast. How are you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm just noticing that the Reformed Libertarians have taken over the green room.
Yes, they have. Yeah, I don't know if we've ever done a green room, all three of us at the same time. So
we have not, according to my lights.
Right. So no, this is a monumentous historic moment. Although we should have done this for Reformation Day, that would have been perfect. So we'll have to we need to actually plan a Reformation Day live stream next year.
Every day is Reformation Day with us, so we can do it anytime.
We can do it anytime.
That's true. So if you guys want to, I didn't prep you for this exactly, but since you guys have been on green rooms before, but just to reintroduce you guys and just the Reformed Libertarians podcast and the kind of content you guys do, because it's a little bit, different than what I do and other ones do. So either one of you, if you guys want to take a little bit of a, give the 60-second elevator pitch about what you guys do. And then, Kerry, also, if you want to plug Mere Liberty and anything, you and I are very busy. I feel like I have 5 projects and you have like 5 different projects you could plug, but go ahead and get all the plugs and stuff out of the way before we get into tonight's conversation topic.
Okay. Gregory, you want to introduce Reformed Libertarians first?
We are dedicated to educating and inspiring listeners to embrace and promote libertarianism from a Reformed perspective. And if you want to find out what in the world does that mean, you want to listen to our podcast. I don't know. Is that a good pitch to people really like, oh, I want to find out what that means?
Well, let me add on to that. So, I also approach things from a Reformed worldview, but I'm trying to also appeal to a more mere Christianity sort of thing and do it more at an introductory level. Whereas you guys are like the it's like I'm sort of like Reformed 101, and then you guys go, it's like second level, kind of going deep into the weeds and all of that. So,
you gotta. I think what the burden is for Christian libertarians of whatever variety, right? Whatever kind of Christian you are, and you're a Christian libertarian, I think what's called for, and you should consider this your duty, so get involved in this, try to do this, is not merely to relate libertarianism to your Christian faith on a, I was going to say superficial, that's a bit negative, but on a surface level, ethical coincidences, right? But to the deepest level of religious convictions that produce a distinctively Christian theory. That's what we're about. We're about articulating that as scholarly, rigorous, but armchair scholar understandable level of explaining the Christian grounds for political theory. We're not toying around.
Yeah. So to make a comparison for the libertarian audience that will understand, you guys are like the Stephen Kinsellas of the Reformed theology crossover with libertarianism.
We take that as a compliment. He's a great guy.
Compliment. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Kerry, you want to go ahead and Greg, if you have anything else, or?
Well, I also want to pitch if any Lutherans, if any classical confessional Lutherans are listening to this by chance, I would like to be in contact with you. I'm working on a project of getting some Lutherans together. So for Lutheran libertarians. So let's chat.
Yeah, we know we need more. Like, I know some Lutheran libertarians, yeah, but they are a underrepresented faction in terms of all the sort of ecumenical dialogue within the Christian libertarian community. So, yeah, no, that's a good idea. By the way, I see a lot of you are watching on the vertical stream, and I'm going to do my best, which I might forget sometimes, to while one of us is talking, to maximize it if we're talking for a long time, so it looks a little bit less weird for you. But you can also, if you just prefer to watch it normally, we have it streaming both vertical and just the regular 16:9. So wherever you're watching, if you're on YouTube, you can click on the channel button to go to the live feed and watch it normally if you prefer to do it that way. But however you watch it, we're happy to have you here. We're streaming to YouTube and X tonight. But Kerry, go ahead and if you want to plug Mere Liberty and the other things you have going on.
Sure. So I am the proprietor of mereliberty.com. My mission there is to challenge and rethink prevailing paradigms. It is coming from a reformed and libertarian perspective, but I talk about all sorts of different topics, from abortion to critical thinking to women in the church, things of that nature. So let's see what else. I have my own podcast, Dare to Think, which is actually going to be relaunching sometime early next year, maybe. I've got some work that I'm doing behind the scenes on that. And then I'm also a co-author on the book Faith Seeking Freedom, which is being currently expanded, and not sure exactly when it's going to be published, but it'll be sometime next year. So those are some of the projects that I'm working on.
Awesome. Yes. And I will also be, so I have edition 1 right here. I can show everybody. This is Faith Seeking Freedom version 1. And as you can see, yep, that was Dr. Norman Horde, Doug Stewart, Kerry Baldwin, and Dick Clark. Edition 2 will also have myself and then fellow Libertarian Christians co-host Cody Cook on the byline as well. So yeah, that'll come out sometime next year. And we're super excited for that. We've done a lot of writing and bickering, and then more writing and then more bickering, and but I think the final product is going to be really nice. So super excited for that. So tonight's conversation, what I wanted to have you guys on to talk about, I listened to a recent debate on Tim Pool's The Culture War show, and I was interested to watch this because he had two people who I kind of often when I follow them on social media, I'm often disagreeing with them, but for different reasons. And I know they disagree with each other a lot. And so I thought it was going to be interesting, and it was. But they talked about a lot of stuff that I was the entire time I'm listening to it, I was like, I was so mad that there wasn't like a principled Christian libertarian there in the studio to just like offer the correct contrast to both of them, because it was literally, you know, one of my favorite memes is it comes from Family Guy, where he's just sitting at between his two kids at the table, and they're just acting, you know, obnoxiously and horribly towards each other, and he goes, kids, you're both just awful, right? So, and you know, listen, and I don't want to be too disparaging. There are, you know, things about Joel and his work at the Babylon Bee, which I've liked over the years, and Auron MacIntyre over at the Blaze. He's done stuff with Scott Horton and other libertarians at the time. So he's, you know, although he's a little bit disparaging libertarians in this conversation, at other times he has been, you know, more friendly to us than other conservatives. But they both have things where they're right, both have things where they're wrong. Even where they're right, though, they're oft, you know, when one of them is making a good point, they're not able to back it up because they don't have the correct epistemology or the correct political philosophy backing up their claims. And so I thought that it would be fun, because a lot of what they get into, they're talking about what is the path forward for America, and then kind of reflecting back on the history of America. And so we're here on the you know, Thanksgiving Eve, if you can call it that, time when people think about, you know, kind of the people coming here to America and why they founded, and you know, why they settled here, thinking about how America was founded and the history, which can be complicated with high points and low points. And so I think it kind of works to react to this conversation and talk about these things, you know, how we view what's going on in America today, how we view America historically, the Constitution, and obviously we're going to be doing this from a libertarian and Christian and, as we established, reformed worldview with the three of us here. Kerry, I know you also listened to the conversation. Did you have any, just sort of, I guess, like meta level, introductory level thoughts in terms of your takeaways listening to the whole thing?
Well, I mean, the whole conversation starts out with, this idea that everybody on the right united to defeat the left in the presidential election when they elected Trump. And then, now that he's been elected, there's less of a reason for the right to be so united. Their differences are coming out. And the big major question is, well, where do we go from here? How do we get to what we want? And what principles are the principles that we're going to actually, put down, put our flag down on? And I remember thinking during that thing, I said, oh, this is the question that libertarians get all the time. Like, oh, this sounds really nice, but how are we going to get there? And it's certainly a valid question. But what I keep hearing over and over and over, whether it's the question for libertarians or even the discussion on Tim Pool's show, what I notice over and over again is people want like central figureheads. They want their, they want their front man. And right now the fight is, well, is it Nick Fuentes? Is it Trump? Is it Thomas Massey? Like, who's the front man? Who's the one that's actually like the totality of the representation of our ideas? And that's a very statist, central planning perspective. And it's one, libertarians can't answer that question. Shoot, we're having fights about whether Dave Smith should be the face of libertarianism. And I think it's just the wrong way to be thinking about it. Like, yes, we have to move forward. Yes, we need to figure out what principles we're going to be grounded on. But it necessarily has to be broad tent if we believe in a free society. And so it's very difficult to say, well, my little niche of Christian nationalism or my little niche of originalist constitutionalism or, whatever other niches are out there, whatever Nick Fuentes is, I can't peg him down. Like that, I think that's the wrong tactic, but that's what people keep on going for is who's the central figure and how are they going to actually get us back to normal, whatever that is.
Yeah, no, I think that's all well said. Greg, you decided to just come in here and kind of be the confused Gen Xer who's like, I don't know who any of these people are. I don't know exactly what you guys are talking about, but explain it to me like I'm 5. So we're going to be trying to kind of
That's what I was going to say. I was going to put it more entertainingly and say, pretend that I'm in my 50s and that I've never heard of any of these guys and I don't know what they're talking about. So, yeah. Who is Tim Pool? Where did he come from? What's his shtick?
Tim is just a podcaster. He was originally kind of actually very similar to me. He was like he did a lot of coverage of like Occupy Wall Street, and he kind of came from more of the progressive, like the real progressive left, but not a woke progressive lefty. But when the left went woke, then he was kind of like one of those original people who came from the left and was like, oh, the left left me because they're just going into all this woke insanity. And that did kind of put him into more of actually for a while, a libertarian orbit. And so he's had guys like Dave Smith and Scott Horton on and featured people from the Libertarian Party and movement on his show a lot. But he does like a daily show, which is just like covering the news with a different group of panelists each night.
He talks about current events.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then he also has this show he does in the mornings called The Culture War. And it's typically, as the name says, he has people on to do a debate, usually based on something that's more of a, culture war or cultural or something like that kind of disagreement, or something that's going on in the in the culture and the society that people are arguing about, that might be connected to politics and current events, but isn't necessarily just pertaining to that. So
okay, so who are the two other guys that he's having a discussion with?
Joel Berry is one of the contributors and I think founders of the Babylon Bee.
I think he said he was the general editor.
Yeah. So
I only know Kyle Mann. Everybody else of the Babylon Bee doesn't matter. He is the Kyle, you're the Babylon Bee. That's all I know.
And then Auron MacIntyre is someone who, from my memory, I think is one of these people who kind of, and he probably would disagree with the label, but the way I would label him is that he's one of those libertarians turned kind of post-libertarian, where he's a Christian. I guess, as you could say, he's kind of a paleo conservative now. Like, he's still kind of like anti-war and anti sort of like globalist, anti-left, but sort of somewhere between, like, I guess similar to a CJ Angle in a way, but I don't know that he's
what's this guy's name again? Auron
MacIntyre. He
and
does
what's his platform?
He's on the Blaze.
The Blaze. Okay.
Yeah, he has his own show on the Blaze, the Auron MacIntyre show.
That's Glenn Beck's thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And then he wrote a book once, which it has some interesting insights and some libertarian overlap, called Total State, which just kind of gets at the fact that how, like, even though we don't live in a maybe necessarily completely totalitarian state, that, like, even our market-based institutions and cultural institutions, insofar as they were hijacked over the left, and we kind of saw this play out in COVID, were able to effectively install a sort of at least temporary totalitarian kind of apparatus through these different things, and sort of how, like, so he's someone who kind of like, well, we need liberty, but the way we get to liberty is not through liberty. So it's confused and full of contradictions and things like that.
Was he taking, this is something that I couldn't figure out, because I'm not familiar with Auron. I'm sort of familiar with Joel and his position, but was Auron taking sort of the Christian nationalist?
He's kind of like a soft Christian nationalist type. Like, he's one of those people that says, I'm not a Christian nationalist really, and I'm not putting that label on me, and I'm not going to, like, I agree with everything they're saying, but I guess he's kind of like, I'm not a libertarian, I'm not a neocon or establishment Republican, and I'm not a Christian nationalist, but I'm kind of like saying that, he's almost doing a sort of buffet where he's like taking from all these different camps. And
was he positioning himself as a constitutionalist as opposed to, was that Joel Berry?
That was Joel Berry.
So the general, and we'll get into this, Joel is going to be trying to defend the Constitution, and Auron's going to bring up some criticisms. So I think that's enough. I mean, more of what Joel and Auron believe will come out as we start playing the
okay.
So we're going to try to get through as much as we can of the first hour. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to skip over some sections, but we're going to start by playing like the first couple minutes, which will be Tim kind of introducing the Joel and Auron, and then they'll kind of introduce the debate, and then we'll go from there. If either of you guys want me to pause it at any point, like before I pause it, just kind of like put your hand up, or just say, I have something, and I'll pause it.
Okay.
Right.
MAGA in Civil War. Gives me an excuse to say Civil War, not in the context of people killing each other, just in the more political context. And that is, there's been a big debate going on for some time. There's some animosity between prominent conservative personalities and each other and large organizations. And this has bubbled up into the realms of conspiracy theory, as well as just mainstream debate over the direction the conservative movement should be going. Now, Donald Trump still has several years left, and he still is basically a unifying force. But what happens when he goes? Will the right stick together despite disparate ideologies coming together under Trump? Because, well, let's be honest, the left has gone particularly crazy. But now that we're seeing the waning of woke and DEI, it seems that the differences are starting to really come to the surface between factions on the right. And thus, we have today's debate. So how about we'll start here with good Sir Joel. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Joel Berry. I'm the managing editor of the Babylon Bee and chief troll in Auron MacIntyre's comment section on Twitter. So,
well, right on. And Auron MacIntyre.
Hey, I'm Auron MacIntyre. I host a show on Blaze TV or MacIntyre Show. Catch it on YouTube, Rumble, all of those places.
Let's just real quick about an elevator pitch. What is the debate? What is the argument?
Well, I guess, first of all, I think it's a debate worth having, and a debate worth having in the open. And I think it's encouraging that we're having this debate. It's a sign that we've kind of won in one sense. We've made it to level 2. The only interesting conversations being had right now are on the right, between the right and other factions of the right. And we're at this point where we kind of have to define who we are and who we're not, what our vision for the future is. We've been defined so long by what we're against, and that's really easy. Now we have to start kind of being defined by what we're for.
So within that, there's a bunch of different issues. There are many different issues. Yeah. And so the debate is basically, what is the identity of the right moving forward? I think is that one way to put it?
I think so. Do you think that's fair?
Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think obviously, as Joel said, what was holding us together was fighting the left. And as soon as you get done, the nature of coalitional politics is the minute you come into power, then you decide what part of the coalition is going to be driving this thing. And I think there's a lot of clashes that were unresolved, even though Trump took power and unified in a lot of ways. Foreign policy, a lot of American identity, issues of nationalism, these things were not completely addressed. And so now they have to be worked through in one way or another. And that's what you're seeing play itself out.
So that's kind of the context for why they are having this debate, is because they think that they are agreed that we have to try to stay unified to keep the left from reclaiming power, but then they're finding that these sort of things that they these things that they thought that they could kind of shove away in terms of disagreements they had are coming to a head and causing major divisions.
I got some thoughts on that already.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, they're acting like the right is this movement. There's different, it's like different denominations within Protestantism, and they all kind of said, okay, we're going to have this decided get together and support Trump. Give me a break. There are more voting Republicans than there are Democrats. So for the time being, and don't tell me, Biden won, and so that, is up in the air as to a fact. No, that was completely BS. He did not win. That was fraud. There are just more Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats couldn't, scam the election this time, so Trump won. It's not like the right came together to elect Trump together, on some plan. That's ridiculous. Okay, so that's my first thought.
By the way, for YouTube terms of services, Greg is just suggesting this in Minecraft and not in reality. So this is all alternate reality Greg is speaking of. Anyway, continue.
Okay, so the idea that the right, somehow came together to elect Trump. His opponent was Kamala freaking Harris.
Yeah.
There's no way the American people were going to elect that, toilet zombie. Give me a break. Okay, so Trump won because obviously.
Yeah,
okay,
I think that's a good point, because we've been, for the past, as long as I can remember, we have been voting for people because we hate the other guy.
Yeah.
That's
obviously
that's what's been going on. And conservatives have completely lost any sense of principle. All they've been doing is conserving the status quo.
Okay, so that's my second point. So then they're talking about, now that we came together and we elected Trump, which is not what happened. They're like, well, now we got to figure out which principles are going to guide our movement. And it's like, you don't have principles guiding your movement.
Yeah.
And Trump is not a principles guy. Obviously, these people are just living in La La Land. I mean, I'm shocked at how dumb they all sound.
Well, that's the problem with having a political party and identity
So
that's just
crazy.
based upon we're not the Democrats. And
Oh
to be
my
fair, the
gosh, what a
Democrats
bunch of
do the same
lunatics.
thing in reverse. And then so it's always this sort of forestalling of it's always the most important election of our lifetime, right? And so we're always encouraged to sort of forestall acting on principle, on voting on principle, or not voting on principle because, well, I guess maybe one day we'll have to do that, but not this election.
Yeah.
This election, if the other side wins, then it's the end of our country. And again, both sides are always saying that. And I guess it's one of those things where like, because I did vote for Trump this last time around, and I was like, well, maybe, I don't know, like maybe once in a while it's like the boy who cried wolf, and maybe it could be. But still, like even if there are some elections that have some consequence, it doesn't change the fact that the underlying problem is this sort of, the trolley changes from blue to red, but still continues to drive, towards the edge of the cliff.
Yeah.
If it's a trolley problem, it's just like, that's all we're doing. It's like, what color is the trolley going to be? Blue or red? Either way,
Right.
we're going to govern like socialists.
Yeah,
and-
but my main impression based on this introduction is that these yahoos are not living in reality. They have no way. They just seem totally incapable of evaluating objective reality. It's just nuts.
Well, it's almost
totally off the hook.
There's that, but conservatives in particular, conservatives have been operating on pragmaticism for so long that they don't have, like, one of the comments that they bring up later on is that this idea of being a principled leader or a principled politician or governing on principles is sort of pie in the sky, abstract, doesn't really matter, doesn't really it's sort of out of touch, and it doesn't get to the heart of the problems. And it's like, guys, we have the problems we have because you guys resorted to pragmatism. And now you're saying, oh, we need to have principles and figuring out what our North Star is and what unites us all. And they abandoned it. And they don't even have a high view of principles to begin with. They think it's pie in the sky.
And then, as we'll see coming here soon. So this, I kind of framed the title for this stream like, what is conservatism actually? Because that's what they're arguing about in a sense. And Joel is going to, in this next segment I'm going to play, almost attempt to define kind of what unites conservatism in a way. But then, as you're going to quickly find out, is that it's mostly positions and sound bites. But then when they start pressing for where are we grounding this in, and how are we going to, like, do you have a well fleshed out theory? Like, well, no, we just have to figure it out. So I'll go ahead and bring that back up, and we'll play that next section.
And I want to start with this. One of the breaking points, I suppose, or one of the inflection points is Tucker Carlson. It's not just the interview with Nick Fuentes, but also his appearance at Charlie Kirk's memorial and his general sentiment towards Israel, Zionism, or some people just outright said he's anti-Semitic. And we saw text messages from Candace Owens, from Charlie, talking about not wanting to remove Tucker Carlson, though there were donors pressuring him to do so. So it seems like this is the big point. And it seems like the word that pops up every time is Israel. Is this maybe the central focus of what this argument is about, or are there other issues at play?
I want to say no. I think Israel is maybe kind of a symptom of the problem, and it can be a huge distraction, and we could sit here for 3 hours kind of going back and forth about it.
By the way, I'm going to be adjusting the speed because they all talk at different speeds, but if it's ever going too fast for either one of you, just let me know.
Go for it.
Israel, because it's such a contentious issue. But I think that the fight is a little more fundamental than that. And Auron, I want you to make sure I'm characterizing it fairly too. But maybe it would help if we kind of, I wrote down a little diatribe here because I wanted to kind of just list all of the things that I think we do agree on. Because the question I get all the time, and I've heard you being asked this question as well, like, why are Joel Berry and Auron MacIntyre fighting? Like, why are you guys at odds with each other? You seem to agree on like 98% of stuff. What's going on? So I wanted to kind of define that a little bit. Is that fair? Like, can I just kind of like run through some of these things?
Yeah.
And then you just tell me like if I'm off or, if I'm characterizing it well. I think this is where we agree. So in 2006, I was in Fallujah. I was an infantry Marine, thinking I was fighting for my country, fighting them over there so we wouldn't have to fight them over here, that whole line, But when I came back, I started school, I went to university, I realized that the real battle to save America, it wasn't overseas, it was here, because the most dangerous enemy to our republic was running our universities and institutions. So what we've seen over the last 150 years, leftism has destroyed our culture and our constitution. From FDR's New Deal and his devastating expansion on the bureaucracy, the horror of abortion, LBJ's Great Society, it destroyed the black family, permanently dependent underclass. We've watched over a century as our constitution has been eaten away, from civil rights law, which led to the permanent enshrining of leftist dogma, from racial quotas in congressional districts to DEI, to forcing women to change with men in their locker rooms. We've seen the value of our dollar be destroyed by government spending. We've watched as our own nation became a totalitarian state during COVID, and no one has been held accountable for that. We've seen our government and media lie to us again and again. Mass immigration is destroying our culture. Leftist judges and DAs punish good and reward evil. Young men can't afford to buy homes. Young women are completely fried on SSRIs, birth control, and communist religion pumped into their cute, empathetic female brains. Americans are not having babies anymore. Muslim immigrants are. We watch as death to America is chanted from Dearborn. Somali flags are flown in Minneapolis after we fought 2 pointless wars on the false premise that if we fight them over there, we don't have to fight them over here. Young white men were subjected to the most wicked bigotry and racism and discrimination. And all the while, we watched as our quote-unquote dignified conservative class did nothing about it. We heard lofty platitudes, and conservatism conserved very little. We saw our churches. We saw cowardly pastors who were supposed to be speaking truth into the culture and standing against the spirit of the age, instead went along with it. And so here we are, and a ton of people have lost faith in everything. All
right, so I want to pause it there for a moment. Kerry, I wanted you to speak a little bit to this, because I know you are I forget where, I know you served. I forget exactly where in the military you served. I know you served. And there's something here where, like, he starts to approach something where I'm like, he's kind of like, all the pieces are in play, but I don't see him connecting the dots, right? Because he's like, man, our economy's crashing, the currency's being debased and devalued, we have all this debt, we have all these sort of like erosions of our liberty here at home. And
Tyranny
also
only started in 2020.
Right. And then he's like, but he also, like, he started with like, well, I served and we fought these pointless wars, but he only connects it to Muslims. And I'm like, you don't think that, like, you know, the erosion of our liberties and the debt and all this has, you know, anything to do with the military industrial complex? And it was more than just 2 pointless wars. Like, I mean, unless you're, depending on how you, if war is only boots on the ground, even that I think is wrong. But like, what about all the countries where we've done regime change and drone strikes? And so I'm just like, you know, there's something there where I feel like he's sort of like, you know, again, all the pieces are in play, but he's not. So it's like, because he almost sounds like he could be doing a Ron Paul thing and being like, you know, the obvious connection between all of these things is that, like, we have the economic system we have because it allows the empire to be an empire, right?
Yeah.
But he's not actually doing that.
Well, I'm guessing that him and I are probably roughly the same age. My brother was in Fallujah, actually. So, did he say he was in the Marine Corps or the Army, or did he say?
I forget if he said.
My brother was in the Marine Corps. He was in Fallujah. I guess the second time. So it depends on when Joel was in Fallujah. I was in the Air Force. Yeah, I think, you know, as I was listening to him, I had this moment where I was just like, oh, bless his heart. Like, I see him being sort of at the beginning of realizing that the military globetrotting is a problem. You know, he's sort of where I was when I was learning about Ron Paul and being challenged with the idea that interventionism, you know, foreign interventionism was a good idea. So I can forgive him for that. Like, that's not, I mean, at least he has crossed that threshold, thank God. But yeah, I don't think that he has quite thought through all of the things that I think the three of us have already thought through when it comes to the military and spending and the impacts on the economy and the family. And like, I mean, all of his stuff, like all of his grievances, I, you know, give a hearty yes and amen. Those are all legitimate grievances. But you want to talk about tearing up the family? Let's talk about PTSD. Let's talk about the wars and the impacts on veterans and the abuse at home and all of those things. There's a huge impact from that, and we can't let that go.
Well, I feel like he's basically giving this litany, right? And this could be multiplied 100,000 times. You could go back to the very beginning with the Continental Congress establishing the Constitution illegitimately, right? That was a coup. But in any case, so you could just have a list of the hundreds and thousands of things that the government has done to damage society and undermine liberty, and it's like his conclusion is, okay, what are we gonna do to like help this institution that's an unmitigated evil in our lives be better or something? I don't know where he's going with it, but he's acting like, I mean, like at the end of that list, to connect the dots, somebody clip this and send it to this guy. What's his name again?
Joel Berry.
Joel Berry.
Someone clip this and send it to Joel Berry. Joel, the answer is anarchism. We don't need a state. They're an unmitigated evil. The litany of society destructing things that the government has done means, this is the conclusion you need to come to, brother, means we cannot have a monopoly on civil governance. Yeah. Talk to me. Send me an email.
Well, so this is another good point, because I hear this a lot. I heard this from Joel. I hear this from Christian nationalists, from paleo conservatives, all of the, we'll say, non-anarchist sort of in our spheres of influence people. Everybody wants to go back. They keep saying this. We want to go back. And Joel brings this up. He's like, I want to go back to the Constitution. And Auron's like, which one? Which was a great question, which we can get into later. But the point is you can't go home, Pinocchio. It's like, it's over. We have to move forward. You can't go back. And so it's either you look at the good things that that America was founded on. You can take all those good things, discard all the bad crap, but it's not going to look the same. We're not going back, guys. We have to move forward. That's the only way. And if we're forward thinking in that way, then maybe we stand a chance at acquiring a free society again. But it's not going to happen as long as you're romanticizing history.
Yeah, I will say one of the things that we're not going to get too much into here, but since we were talking about Ron Paul and the wars and all that, I think there's a lot of people like Joel Berry who I think try to give a little bit of credit to the non-interventionists to say, yeah, there are some dumb wars. But as Tim Pool alluded to, then Joel kind of sidestepped, for Joel especially, Israel is a stumbling block. And he claims not to be a dispensationalist, but I follow these guys on Twitter and I see what they post, and he is constantly railing against guys like Scott, guys like Dave, guys like Ron Paul, guys like Tom Woods, people at the Libertarian Institute and the Mises Institute, because we're principally and consistently non-interventionists and against foreign aid across the board, including for the nation state that calls itself Israel.
And he's spending his spare time listening to Prager University. Is that the problem here?
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent. And to some extent, it's a mixed bag of, even though he's not a dispensationalist, he does, I think, have some Christian Zionist and at least dispensationalist influenced views in terms of the covet. So I think he gets this sort of like a cop out to say he's not a dispy, because some people will do this by saying like, well, I don't believe in the rapture and I'm not, like, they're eschatologically not dispensationalists, but there's a lot of evangelicals who are still covenantally.
Yeah. So he's just an independent evangelical, right?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, so
where do you go to church, Joel? Let's talk about that too.
Now to defend, generic non-denominational evangelicals, there are ones who have, at least
who are
on the covenantal level, embraced the Reformed view, right? Like I go to a non-denominational church that like part of our becoming a church member is reading through the Westminster and London 1689 Baptist confessions and understanding covenant theology and distinguishing, ourselves from the more dispy crowd and all that. But Joel is very much, and then he also has this thing, which again is complicated, but it's like, well, we have to be pro-Israel because Muslim bad.
Right.
Which is like,
because of Dearborn in Minneapolis. Does he live in California?
I don't know where he lives. But I will say, like, this gets so complicated. I don't want to like go too far afield of what we're going to talk about. But like the Muslim thing is one of those things where, like, yeah, there are some examples of some Muslims coming here and committing crimes or advocating for things that are bad. And then there's also just a lot of like fake news and clickbait garbage stuff that's on social media that's just designed to whip people into a fearful frenzy and sort of accelerate this culture war tension. And people are there's just so many people who are kind of uncritically reacting to things like that, because there's like, I've looked into the Dearborn, Michigan stuff, and like there's a couple examples of things that are bad, and then there's a couple where like deceptive editing and whatnot, and then you look into it and you're like, oh no, like there was a peaceful parade and they marched through the streets, and like, I don't know, like you can have opinions about that and criticize Islam, but it's like, I don't know, it's like, although like they're instituting Sharia law and all this stuff, I'm just like, where? Like I always ask them, like, where even in Europe, it's like, where they actually instituted Sharia law and they're actually like in charge of the criminal courts and legal systems and turning any province in Europe or America into a civil Muslim district, and it's like, I haven't seen evidence for that happening.
Yeah, you got a Middle Eastern immigrant rape problem all over Europe. That's for sure.
Yeah,
that did happen. Yes.
So I do think that what they're doing is setting up parallel courts for their own people.
I think
they're saying they're not under the jurisdiction of I think Birmingham County or something.
From what I've seen, it's kind of the same way that I know Jewish and Catholic will have like their own sort of like, we're going, like, in order to get a divorce and have it sanctioned by the Catholic Church or your Jewish synagogue or whatnot, like they're going to have their own sort of councils and governances within those bodies to kind of like handle those sorts of disputes. But I haven't seen examples where they actually are like where it's all basically just enforced through like membership to the church or the whatever
mosque.
the mosque or to the for a Jewish person, the synagogue. Not like they don't have law enforcement where they're like busting down people's houses and like put your covering back on or anything like that, as far as I can tell. And if they did, it's like, okay, well then that's wrong. And like you just like, if anyone else was trying to like enforce unjust laws, we shouldn't allow that. We have enough, just from atheists and Christians in our country, we have enough laws being put on the books that are bogus and not legitimate laws. So it again, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't want to like whitewash it and pretend like there's no risk and there's no problem that could ever arise from I think you guys know, like like the immigration thing. I kind of sometimes am a little bit in the middle, because I'm like, hey, yeah, I think if you had like 100,000 or 500,000 Muslims move into your neighborhood from the Middle East, that could probably propose or produce some culture clash and some potential conflicts. And yet I also know that there's like there's sort of a reasoned response to that, and then there's like a losing your mind reactionary response.
Well, here's what the main complaint is premised on beneath the whole discussion of anything to do with who's legally or illegally or through the government's intervention and what of our tax money they're using to support these people and all that. The whole thing is the United States existing. Like, that's the unquestioned assumption, presupposition at the bottom of all that. And guess what? It doesn't need to. We don't want it to. So you get rid of that, and it doesn't matter.
Well, Kerry, did you have something quick, or do you want to?
Oh, I was just going to draw a comparison between, the idea that Muslims are going to breed everybody out and the fact that Christian nationalists are trying to do the same thing. So,
Yeah,
It'd be a breeding war.
yeah.
Good
But
grief.
if you live 3,000 miles away from Dearborn, if you live in Dearborn and you don't like your neighborhood because the people stink and whatever, because they eat cats, you should move somewhere else. But to say like, oh, I live, 3,000 miles away from Dearborn and I'm really upset because there's people who I think if I lived next to, I wouldn't like. It's like, you're ridiculous.
So, but this sort of goes back to the whole thing, and like the whole point of the debate. I don't think it's a debate really on Tim Pool's show. They want to have this idea of a free society, but they can't tolerate people who disagree with them being in their society. So you can't have it both ways. Like,
Right.
if you have a free society, you have people that you vehemently disagree with, and they might be your neighbors.
Yeah. Or if you don't want them to be your neighbors, you have to move. Like, you can't tell them, like, you can move. You can be like, as Greg said, you're like, I don't like it here, so I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
But if
There's
someone...
plenty of places that are super duper white. Go there. Don't say because the United States of America, at least the 48 contiguous, the lower 48, we're like this bounded jurisdiction that we need some uniform policy. No, we don't. The United States of America can cease to exist.
Right, or at least the current governmental apparatus that we're speaking of, and the concept of like America and like a landmass or even a people who might identify as American to some extent, like that can potentially be salvaged. But we'll get.
Definitely.
This is actually
the people in the land are here, but like the governing structure and that we're a thing when we're all in it together and we've got to make it work together. No, we don't.
Well, and that wasn't even. So we're gonna get into this. They're gonna start quickly getting into the Constitution and these legal principles that we want to talk about. So let me bring them back up.
A lot of people are like, just burn it all down. And I think I would say that we kind of agree with the problem, right? Like, sure, you would be on board with all of those. Yeah. And I think that's what, Auron and I are polemicists. We're really good at pointing at something that sucks and saying, hey, look at this. This really sucks. And that's easy mode. The hard part is like pointing the way out. What do we do now? How do we get out of this? How do we turn it around? Can it be turned around? And I think that's where Auron and I we diverge a little bit. And I kind of wrote 3 points that I think maybe we can kind of delve into deeper. The first thing, I think the Constitution is still relevant, and I think we can get back to it. 2, I believe that your political theory over relies on like the political theory, realpolitik, kind of like a spiritually devoid realism that I think is a little imbalanced. And then 3, I believe that there is a way back. I don't think like the only way out is through. I think that we can claw our way back.
Well, I have a question on your first point. You said, what was it? The Constitution is still relevant? How did you say it?
Yeah. So, one thing that is often said by kind of the dissident right or post-liberal crowd is that, you hear this quote from John Adams all the time, that our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It's inadequate for the government of any other. We're no longer a moral and religious people, and so the Constitution it's inadequate. And there is some truth to that. But I also think that it's not too late.
When you say the Constitution, do you mean the original intention?
Yeah, I would say that.
Blasphemy should be illegal.
Well, blasphemy wasn't outlawed in the original Constitution.
Blasphemy is illegal. At the founding of this country, when the Constitution
was, yeah,
you couldn't blaspheme. You also couldn't swear in public or say obscenities.
Correct.
And the interpretation. The important thing to understand about the Constitution is that we interpret it wholly differently from how it was interpreted by the founders. In that, it only applies to federal law. Meaning, if you lived in Virginia and Virginia said guns are banned, then guns were banned. Yep. But the federal government couldn't ban states from allowing people or couldn't ban the ownership of guns. So when we look at the Constitution right now, and people say it should apply, they're talking about a dramatically different interpretation.
Right.
Yes. And go ahead.
When you say the Constitution is still relevant, the question is which one? right? Because as Tim has pointed out, after the incorporation doctrine, we radically change our understanding of what the Constitution meant. Of course, another radical change comes. I mean, we don't number our republics, but we have changed the fundamental meaning of the Constitution many times over. When we got rid of the Articles of Confederation, we were one country. When we instituted the Constitution, we were a new one. When we instituted the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, that radically changed the way that federalism works. We basically destroyed the 10th Amendment right then and there. Incorporation doctrine changes it again. The civil rights regime more or less rewrites the entire Constitution, our understanding of it. So the question is, I have for most people who want to return to the Constitution is which one? Because what I find is most conservatives say, oh, I want to go back to founding. No, you don't. You don't want to go back to what the founders actually believed. You don't want to go, and that's okay. But let's be honest about what we're talking about. What we believe now, what conservatives in the 1990s believed, what they believe now is radically different from what the founders believed. And if we went back to what the founders believed, most people saying, I want to return to the Constitution would be up in arms and they'd call it some kind of religious Christian nationalist fascism. Like they would. They absolutely would. They wouldn't let the Immigration Act of 1790, like they would not support a return to those things. So that's critical when we say we can go back. It's going back to what? When?
I agree.
All right. So yeah, this kind of gets into a lot of what I want to talk about, which is I think that Auron has a good point here, which is actually, I think, to be consistent on this, like it's better grounded in the kind of critique we would give of the Constitution as Christian libertarian ANCAPs, which is that this is part of the problem with the Constitution. He's going to get more into this later, of course, but that like you brought up like the originalist interpretation, right? Well, I don't want to jump the gun too much, but like if you're going to have this whole idea, this has always been my problem with constitutionalists and minarchists since I like became an ANCAP, is like if you're going to say that we can bind a state to a contract and be like, you know, and that's the way we're going to have government, and government's constrained by the contract, then it can't be this like dubious thing of like the contract needs interpreted by original, like if the people change or something about like the government changes, like then the contract has to change, but then it has to change through like the creation of a new contract and everyone signing on. But the way the Constitution was made, there's so many ways to kind of change it and to change the interpretation of it and the application of it over time that don't involve actually like and the Constitution wasn't even, I think, ratified in a libertarian way anyway. But even if you're going to grant, like, you know, like it's not like every time the Constitution changed, they stopped, had a new constitutional convention and sent delegates from every state and then agreed upon a new constitution every couple years or every couple decades or whatever.
Joel Berry's in over his head because he's obviously advocating for some vision, and in his mind, this is getting back, rescue. You know, we can do it. We can revive the Constitution, or I don't know, it's legal force or something, whatever he has in mind. This idea of what a country, a nation, a federal government, and particular states that functions with whatever view he has. He's like, this can be done, but he obviously was not a liberal arts major in college. He didn't study history. He probably doesn't know very much economics, and he probably didn't study political science, so he doesn't know what he's talking about. To steelman his perspective, though, I think he means all the bloated, you know, from a let's say at best a classical liberal perspective, right? So if James Madison or somebody, one of the founding fathers that wasn't like Hamilton, had a good view and was like, okay, you're now on the Doge committee. Where would you start making cuts? And can we get the federal government to just do, you know, what's authorized in the Constitution for it to do? You know, cut it back to like, you know, 3 cabinet departments or something. And I'm like, so he like, I think maybe that's what he has in mind. Like he really, okay, yeah. So all the stuff has been added.
I don't think he knows what he has in mind, other than just that it's this vague, like, go back to, like, it's a platitude. And then when he's pressed on it, he's like, well, I don't know exactly where we should go back to, but like it's like this idyllic, ill-defined, like, well, the Constitution in just the way that I would like it.
Well,
But he's basically just doing the same, and he's gonna get called out on this later. Like he's just doing the same thing the left does, where he's like, oh, so you just want so it's just like it's just as you define it, right? You're just saying
it's his appeal to like free busing. He's pulling a Mondami is with the Constitution.
I think
he's like, I don't know, just
I think it's
the Constitution again.
I think it's a little bit more innocent than that. I think it's I keep looking at him and listening to him and saying to myself, this is like the early days of Ron Paul. The early days of Ron Paul, where Ron Paul was talking about the Constitution and talking about, this should be enforced. And a ton of people heard him talking about it and said, oh yeah, this is the way to go. And then you had this reinvigoration of interest in the Constitution. That's where things like, I know the 10th Amendment Center has been around for a very long time, but there was a reawakening to what the Constitution was, what it meant, and all of that when Ron Paul came around. And so when I hear Joel Berry speaking, it's as though he's 20 years behind the curve. He hasn't experienced what the rest of us who lived through the Ron Paul revolution and everything that's happened since. And he's just getting started. And I think a lot of us started with the Constitution, started with going back to those ideas. But I know for like myself, I spent way too much time trying to get back to a constitutional sort of ideal here locally. I spent 8 years being a minarchist, and just, finally coming to the conclusion, this just doesn't work the way we think. Like, this doesn't work the way the American mythos says it's supposed to work. It doesn't look anything like that.
When I was a constitutionalist, I already knew. I was like, as soon as I, became sophisticated in terms of like, oh, what the Constitution is actually doing is supposed to be regulating, people outside the Reformed faith are unfamiliar with what's called the regulative principle, which means you can only do what's specified, what's specifically said, you can do this. It doesn't, if it's not stated you can't do X, Y, and Z, it doesn't mean you can do X, Y, Z.
Right.
It's like you can only do the things that it says. You can do 1, you can do 2. Okay, and that's it. And that's the only 2 things you can do. You can't do other things. You can only do 1 and 2 because it says you can do 1 and 2. Okay, so when I learned that's what the Constitution was supposed to be, and I was like, wow, the government is gigantic. It's like this, super disgusting, obese American who eats junk food and wastes their money on DoorDash.
Yeah. Well, I think
so like I like, as soon as I realized that, as soon as I learned what the Constitution was, I was like, well, like, the government's obviously illegitimate.
Yeah.
I've read the Declaration, and it says we need to overthrow governments like that. So immediately, as soon as I had any cognizance of what the Constitution was, I was like, well, let's get rid of this government now. And that's where Joel should be. Joel, you need to wake up, buddy. You're really naive.
Well, and to Auron's point about the Constitution and the Founding Fathers' values, it's just like, even if we go back to that, though, right, which we would still, as the ANCAPs, critique, his point, which is valid, is that like even the way the country was governed under like the originalist Constitution was like night and day in terms of the level of like how things were decentralized and localized, and so he's like to the point where local government could do things that we disagree with, like have blasphemy laws, right, and have these local ordinances and whatnot. And he's like, so do you not want that? Okay, then you're not arguing for going back to the founding. You're arguing for like So like, are you for like what happened at the end of the Civil War, which they'll get into later, about like,
Well, I would
like
she
the
was
federal government, should we get rid of the 10th Amendment and have it where the federal government can enforce these, certain values, whether they're from the Civil Rights Act or other things, down on the state and local ordinance, to be like, no, you can't do that. Now, like, we as ANCAPs would say, now on one hand, we don't want blasphemy laws. We don't want Sabbath laws. On the other hand, the way we suppose to handle that is not to create a central power that's going to then come and, overrule local communities and what they're doing, but to have competing systems of law, which, at least the Articles of Confederation was getting way closer to than what the Constitution instituted.
But they were conflating a few things. First of all, there is the idea of returning to originalist constitutional principles. And then there's the laws that existed at that time period, right? And what Tim Pool and Auron both were trying to do was to say, if you go back to the principles, you get all of the laws that existed at that time. That's not necessarily the case. So I think that there was a conflation, and maybe even intentional conflation, to try to trip up Joel Berry on that. But it is not the case that just because those principles are in place, you're going to get, just sort of a replay of the, late 1700s, early 1800s, whatever.
Well, no, you'd have to be specific, like, because you could say, well, I want the governance structure of the the original Constitution, but maybe not all of the cultural. So you got to be specific with what you're appealing to.
Sure.
But I think some people can kind of we can sort of view the founders through a very modern lens and just be like, oh, they they had all of the same sentiments we have about culture and religion and things like that.
But that is why you can't go back. That the only way that you move, the only way that you can move is forward. And so any evaluation or analysis that we have for those constitutional principles are going to be interpreted in a 21st century lens, with an aim to move forward. And so we can, like I said before, you can take the good and you can discard the bad, and you can try again, and you're going to run into new problems that then we have to solve. And the cycle just keeps going.
Well, if he himself had the interest in the Constitution that, let's say, non-libertarian Republicans who became fans of Ron Paul, they became fans of Ron Paul, and they're like, "Oh, the Constitution sounds really important. Maybe I should find out about that." And they started reading Ron Paul, and so on. If he developed that level of, even, I'm saying, that basic level of sophistication, that would be great, because then one of the things he would be saying was, well, a centralized national bank is unconstitutional.
Right.
The Federal Reserve is illegal.
Well, that's
illegal.
But that's
so if that dawned on him and he was like, yeah, well, what I mean is we need to get rid of the Fed. Then we're like, yep.
Yeah. But then ending the Fed means no more money to Israel. So that's a major tripping point for, unfortunately, a lot of these.
Okay.
So again, these people hit a point where they're like, I've seen Ben Shapiro do the same thing. Ben Shapiro used to be against talking about the Federal Reserve because he said, well, most of the people who criticize the Federal Reserve are anti-Semitic, which is a code word for they don't support Israel. Then he started to
tell me Jews run the Federal Reserve without telling me Jews run the Federal Reserve.
Yeah,
holy cow!
Just go ahead and perpetuate that stereotype.
Right, exactly.
Man.
And then he started to soften a little bit on it to be like, yeah, maybe the Federal Reserve should at least be audited, or maybe we need to And then as soon as October 7th happened, then it's full blown back to, I mean, but I don't know if you guys have seen this. And I'm not making this up, but back when Ron Paul was running in 2012, Ben was constantly like all the time smearing Ron Paul as an
remember that.
anti-Semite. Even though like anyone who's ever listened to Ron Paul for like 5 minutes would be like, this guy? You're saying this guy is a raging anti-Semite Nazi who wants to kill Jews? Like, seriously? Like, at one point, Ben Shapiro said that, like, Ron Paul is literally fantasizes about strangling Jews. I was just like, yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So it's absent. But this is the problem. That there's people who they have. And Ben used to say he was, like, you know, a fiscal libertarian, right? But he's not. Because the problem, these people will sometimes try to say that, okay, we're pro-liberty and we want to go back to small limited government, we're constitutionalists, but they're not, right? Because when they run into these other things that they want to keep, right, they're like, well, we want to. And anyway, Auron's going to call him out on this later, so we'll keep playing here, and I'll add more commentary when we get to that point.
So the question then becomes, if we're trying to maintain a constitution, a government, I think Auron makes a good point of which one, what is the actual argument for what the country was and why we support it. And this is, it's frustrating to me because I hear this a lot from moderate or mainstream conservatives, arguments about defending the Constitution. Well, the left says quite literally the exact same thing, but they view it very differently. So what I think we're seeing is...
What do you mean by, like, give me an example?
The leftists argue that we have free speech, but free speech never included hate speech. Hate speech, of course, is speech meant to deride or denigrate minorities or specific groups of people. Free speech meant you could express your opinion, including burning flags. The right says, no, burning a flag is out of the question, but you are allowed to disparage whoever you want. There's different interpretations of what the First Amendment was supposed to be. So if you go back to the founding, free speech was no blasphemy. You certainly can't lock yourself together in the middle of the road. That was nonsense. Now we have a wholly different view. In fact, George Carlin got arrested for swearing. You couldn't swear back then. You couldn't say obscenities.
Right.
So we certainly don't believe in free speech as the founders saw it. We don't believe in free speech as they saw it in 1830. We have a different interpretation. And since the past maybe 15 or maybe 20 years, there's been a bifurcation in American culture as to the understanding of what all of these amendments actually do, notably the Bill of Rights, but even up to the 14th Amendment now, where the argument is anyone born here is American, whereas the rights argument is no, this meant if you were born here at the time, you were a citizen. So I don't know what we're trying to maintain or restore with a constitution other than we have a moral worldview. We use some of the amendments to defend and uphold that moral worldview. To be completely honest, if the majority of people in this country decided the 14th Amendment meant something different, it would be applied that way. So the Constitution really is largely a symbol.
So this is really critical. And this is what I want establishment conservatives to understand. Look, I grew up on talk radio conservatism. I totally understand these pitches. I believe all these pitches. I'm familiar with what they're saying. When you turn the Constitution into a deity, when you deify the Constitution and you make it the central identity, you create a scenario where people are just fighting over the meaning of the words so they can control the definition. A Constitution is not some contract that's written up that then defines the country. A constitution is a reflection of the way that the people are constituted. It is the way that they live their lives, their traditions, their beliefs, their values, their heritage, their language.
Okay, can we pause here for a second?
Doesn't make the people. The people make the Constitution.
20
the
seconds
Constitution
more.
only works when the people are already
clip.
living in the way that the Constitution lays out for them. That's what makes a republic, because they are people who are self-governing. They are living in the way of tradition, and no one needs to come in and tell them how to live their lives and dictate to them each move because they already have such a tightly woven culture.
All right, so that was where my timestamp ended. Yeah, so a lot there. Again, going more into like how we define what a constitution is. But Greg, what are your thoughts?
Well, Auron, how do we say his name?
Auron, I don't know. I think it's Auron.
Like orange, Auron.
Kind of. Yeah.
Okay. What a ridiculous point. We've been ripping on Joel. Now I'm gonna rip on this other guy. So stupid. Like, no one's arguing about the Constitution, man. No one's like, well, I'm gonna control the definitions of these words. No, it's completely irrelevant. The Constitution is a smokescreen. I mean, and when was the last time you saw anything on C-SPAN or whatever, and like they're like, well, we can't have this bill. The gentleman from Louisiana. Well, I'm sorry. Paragraph 6 and subsection 3. It says blah blah. No one cares. It's all BS. Everything the federal government does is with total disregard to the Constitution. No one's using the Constitution to manipulate anything.
Hold on. You're right, but here's the part you're leaving out. Whatever party is in opposition will then pretend to care about the Constitution and point out convenient. Now, it's
Good point.
complete hypocrisy, right?
Yeah.
Because when the Democrats-
That's when they
Democrats
bring up the
are-
Constitution.
yeah,
When they're like, I'm
when-
not in
when-
power.
Right. When the Democrats aren't in power, they're like, how dare Trump use the executive branch power to do all these
Yeah.
unconstitutional things? And when Joe Biden's in there, it's like, oh, what? Every president does this. What's the problem?
Yeah.
Well, this goes back again. I mean, basically what he's saying is it doesn't matter the words that are written down in the Constitution because the meanings of those words always change, which is very leftist, woke, critical theory sort of thing to say. And part of that has to do with the fact that we've turned the United States as a government has turned very pragmatic. And, they've turned away from this idea of principle. And here libertarians have been, ground pounding on the idea of principle and holding to principle and making sure that we have a well thought out political theory. And all of these pragmatists and populists and all of that on both sides just want to stick their fingers in their ears and say, la, 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 I want the Constitution to say what I want it to say. And now they're mad that we're in the situation that we're in.
Right. Well, I think that part of the point that Auron's making, though, which I think has some legitimacy to it, but the problem is he's taking it in a different direction because he's making a point that, like, well, the constitutions don't matter, and he doesn't get too much into his views on this debate, but like he kind of has, as Joel called out later, a more Machiavellian view of politics. So he's not saying this from a libertarian view, but a libertarian could say something similar about the Constitution and say the issue is that the one of the issues with having a Constitution is that it is sort of like the Constitution is at best a reflection of the values of a certain people at a certain point in time, but then it's set in stone for all these people, and even the things that are kind of like put in there that allow it to kind of change over time are insufficient. And we would say that this is why republicanism or constitutionalism is not true liberty, because it doesn't allow for the constant kind of flux of law to be practiced and adjudicated in a fashion that adapts well over time, right? In this decentralized fashion. And so when he's kind of saying the point that like, he's kind of right in a sense that like a minarchist constitutionalist republic could only work in this mythical land where the entire population had this faith and belief and agreement with everything that's already in the Constitution to begin with. Otherwise, like, they're eventually going to be arguing over, what the word. So like, we obviously don't want to say that, like, I agree with you, like there is words have meaning, and we don't want to take this in like a woke direction, but there is like a libertarian version of this critique, which I think has validity. Maybe I'm not expressing it the most clearly, but
let me bring up a parallel or an analogy. You tell me if this is what side of this he falls on. Okay, so one of my criticisms of Reformed and Presbyterian denominations that have a confession of faith, right? They have a statement of faith, usually a historical Reformed confession. Let's say it's the Westminster Standards, the Westminster Confession of Faith. Let's say it's the American version, 1788, with those revisions. They say, this is our church's confession of faith. We're a confessionally reformed church. But then they basically let anybody believe roughly what they want to believe. Let pastors take exception. This is called loose or system subscription or something. I'm basically describing the PCA for people who don't realize what I'm talking about. Okay, so what really is the confession of such a denomination, of such a church? Well, it's only those points of doctrine that are disciplined for, that people actually believe. Unless the church believes a doctrine and they discipline for disbelieving it, it's not your confession.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's me crapping on the PCA. You guys suck.
But yeah, there's a point to this
Also-
where like the real U.S. Constitution is the way we're being governed right now, in a way, right?
Exactly. There is no rule of law. It's
right, we
just
don't-
whatever they're doing.
Our point. So like this is where like Auron, because I have outside knowledge. Like, I know what Auron says in other places, and like he does make, I think, this like observation that's like he's pointing to a real thing, but then just taking it in the wrong direction. Because like he's pointing to it and be like, this is why constitutions and limited republics don't work, and so we just need to understand that politics is power, and so we just need to be comfortable with just using power. And I'm like, no. The issue is this is liberty.
Okay, so now I know. So let me guess. Let me guess. James Lindsay calls him woke, right?
Yes. So the issue is like, no, you're right that our Constitution is bogus and we don't govern this way, and that even trying to govern this way has a fatal flaw in it, because it's actually like there isn't a good way to like it doesn't work. But that doesn't mean you give up on liberty. That means you recognize that constitutionalism is a failed attempt at producing liberty, and now you're like, all right, well then what do we have to do to actually have a legal system that operates by the ideals and principles of liberty? Not just go, we're going to give up on that and just go back to
and become,
so in a weird way.
What
Auron is saying is actually similar to what Joel is saying. But when Joel says, I want to return to this like ill-defined, like pie in the sky, like when the Constitution worked and everyone believed in it time, Auron's like, I want to return to like before that, when we just said screw it and just, governments just have power and just like force people to like, just remove pretense from politics and just, make it a power struggle game. So that's the problem. It's like,
amazing. It's amazing. Might mix right after all, guys.
Yes, that's the problem. Is like he's recognized that we don't live in a limited republic, that we live that we have all this pretense, but what lies underneath of it is sort of like the ruling elites and might makes right. Then go ahead.
But then why do they care? Why open up this conversation by saying, how do we unite the party? What platform are we uniting on? Like, why?
Because they wanted to decide what they're going to shove down everybody's throats once they seize power.
But it doesn't matter.
Shove down throats.
But that's my point, is it doesn't matter. If the only thing that matters is a Machiavellian view, and that it's just who's got the power and how do you keep it, it doesn't matter what your principles are. It doesn't matter what you believe in.
Good point.
You've got the power. Who cares? Why are you talking about this?
Yeah. Well, he wants to use the power for the things that he likes.
Auron wants to convince conservatives to just join in his crusade to say, like, guys, like the left doesn't play, like, here's the steel man of their argument, like in the way they would say it. Not that I agree with it. The left doesn't play by the rules that you're saying we need to play by. So we just need to play by the same rules, and we have to seize power and enforce our values. Either they're going to enforce their values on us, or we enforce our values on them. That's the nature of politics. You can wish it wasn't that way, but that's just the way it is. So figure out what kind of society you want to live in and act to make it happen.
So wait,
Yeah.
let me
for
just
their preferences.
So it's the left is going to strong arm us into holding their values. The left's values, and so the right needs to strong arm the left into holding their values, but they don't know what their values are. They're just
the right doesn't know what their values are.
The right doesn't know what their values are.
Well, maybe not, but there is a practical value. Is we don't like people that aren't like us, people that aren't like me.
Their values are
a solution, guys. Don't bother with the politics. Just round up everybody who's not like you and put them in a gas chamber and turn on the gas.
Their values are Christian aesthetics. and sometimes not
Yeah.
even actual Christian aesthetics, but what they think are Christian aesthetics, right? It's
Yeah.
like we want the streets to. It's like the streets are clean, but in a Christian sense, right? Like that's what they want.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's superficial. It's nominal.
Well, so anybody who's listening to this, I don't. What do we got? You got numbers on who's watching?
We have 135 people watching at this point in time.
That's
Although
nice.
by the time this has like gone fully circulated, we'll probably have somewhere between 500 and 1,000 who have tuned in.
All right, I'm talking to, if you're watching this live right now, 9:26 Eastern Standard Time on Thanksgiving Eve. I have a message for you. If you're one of these people listening and you're thinking, well, I don't know about this full-fledged stateless civil governance, this non-monopolistic libertarian anarchism. I don't know about that. Why? Because you're attached to some idea of the rule of law, right? I already know that's what's got, holding on to that piece. You're like, I don't, what are these guys saying? It sounds like chaos. There's an article called Anarchism as Constitutionalism by Roderick Long, Long. There's a lot of stuff Roderick says that is total baloney, but he's right about this part.
Yeah.
I forget which episode Reformed Libertarians podcast has it in the notes. Maybe it's episode
It might be the
3, 4.
the legitimacy one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In any case, it's probably episode 3. But just you could look it up. You can probably find a PDF version, and this is going to help you conceptualize stateless, non-statist, non-monopolistic civil governance in a way that's actual constitutionalism, that's actual rule of law, and not the facts on the ground that we have now, which is power politics. And you can't manipulate it to your best interest.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Let's play. We're not going to be able to get through everything I had, but let's play at least one more clip here, which I think will be a good place.
That's right. This has been illuminating. I'm shocked that you people waste your time listening to this garbage. Holy crap! This is so ridiculous.
You gotta meet people where they're at, Greg. You gotta go down into the muck and be like, and yeah, be like, we have something different to offer here. So yeah, let's
wait. I'm gonna do my Tim Pool imitation. You ready? Here we go. Okay, go for it.
Oh boy.
Cultural identity. That everything is second nature. They govern themselves, which is to say the community governs. It is tied to those traditions and those beliefs. The Constitution has never and will never compel people to live in a particular way. And when you turn the Constitution into this, the thing that defines you as a people, then it's just about arguing over what that document means. And that's why we so radically changed what the country is, because we abstracted ourselves into this legal definition that can be manipulated by people making arguments rather than tying it to actual beliefs, actual religion, actual tradition.
Well, so you're partially right there in the sense that the Constitution and our laws are a reflection of the people, but you're kind of doing this postmodern thing where, at some point, what do words mean? People define them differently. It's whoever's in power is the one who makes the decision. I'm a moral realist. I believe that words actually do mean something. You can determine what words mean based off of the intent of the person who wrote them to the best of your ability. While yes, the people create the Constitution, I also think that the Constitution and the laws shape the people. And I'll give you an illustration of this. So, if the Constitution is just a snapshot of the people, why did we have to write it down? Why do you think we had to write it down?
Well, the argument, again, for many is that you don't, right? But this is Joseph de Maistre goes into quite a bit of detail in the generative nature of political constitutions as to the advantages and disadvantages of writing things down. And this is something, by the way...
but why do you need the government to enforce it? If it's all coming from the people, why do you even need a government to enforce the law? I mean, if it's springing from the people and the people are going to do what they're going to do, I think they're constituted correctly.
I think your question actually goes to Auron's point as to why you need it written down is because the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists were debating.
I was just getting to that,
yeah, because not everyone was on board, right?
Well, more importantly, the Federalists did not want a Bill of Rights because they were worried that enumerating the rights would make people believe that those are the only rights available to them.
Right.
So they actually thought that writing it down, capturing those rights, guaranteeing those rights was a downside for the
Limiting.
Constitution because
Yep.
it would be limiting. And so this is one of the things, if people have rights, you don't have to tell them. You don't have to enumerate them. That was the understanding of the Federalists, which is why they push back against this. And so you end up in this scenario where, look, you understand, having been to the Middle East, right?
Yep.
Like that actually, the idea that everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property is not actually self-evident to a lot of cultures, a lot of peoples, right?
Correct.
And so actually,
any non-Christian culture.
correct,
yeah.
right? And so when we say self-evident, we meant self-evident to a specific people. So it's not that I don't believe words don't have meaning.
Well,
I
the
believe-
original draft of the Constitution didn't say self-evident. It said like something like divine and inspired. It was
Yep.
more religious in nature,
And-
and because the Declaration was it was a statement of theology. It was a Christian state. It wasn't Enlightenment. You know, the other thing too. You know, I think one of the big debates. You know, there's kind of this new populism on the right. It's more. I don't even know how to describe it. It's more focused on people. It's a little more animal, a little more real.
That's where I wanted to. I stopped a little late. Again, there's something there where Auron's making a at least somewhat valid critique that like, and I think Joel's kind of again. They both have a point. On one hand, law and governments can shape culture, but not in a positive direction, right? At least not that. More often than not, that's not the way it works, because we understand that the nature of the state is, and especially when you have a democratic state, is that people get in there and you know, they're incentivized to act on like getting reelected. Getting reelected means, well, I now have this monopoly of power, so what favors can I offer to voters, to corporations, to lobbyists, in order to secure my so there's all these incentives that happen because of the system you're in. And so and then once you allow government to sort of like infiltrate into different spheres like education and like the economy, media, you can then use that apparatus to influence things, but it's like that all tends to roll in one direction, not in the other direction. And in a way, he's doing again a bit of a mixed bag there, but it's at least somewhat similar to like Spooner's argument that like the Constitution has either been powerless to prevent the government we have or complicit in making it. Those are kind of the only options.
Well,
Right.
and I'm just going to call back to Robert Higgs's nice quote, which is, look, without the state, you're going to have a bad situation. With the state, you're going to have a much, much worse situation.
Right.
And everybody is arguing about what kind of state we want, when over here, the anarchists are saying, that's the much, much worse situation. Let's at least relieve ourselves of some of those problems and just deal with the problems of not having a state.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then these other problems of like, because like there's so many other problems that then are just easier to solve. Like this whole like, I don't want to associate with those people. Well, right now, you can have a little bit of like, you like it is harder when you're in this giant state apparatus with you're all forced to associate under the same legal system while having to compete in a not free marketplace, not capitalism, for resources using a currency that's getting more and more debased over time, causing also so like we have the perfect recipe for not just people who immigrate here, but even just people who are born here to be at each other's throats and not able to find peaceful ways to not just resolve conflicts, but to avoid conflicts.
Right. The ghost of Bastiat haunts us all again. The state is that great fiction by which everyone seeks to what is it? Seeks to live at
everyone else's expense.
Yeah, to live at everyone else's expense. That's what they're all doing. They're like, I want to make things different than this. How can I do that? I guess I have to force everybody.
Yep.
Oh, really? Do you?
Yeah.
What a waste. All right, so let's pray for Tim Poole. He's not a professing Christian, is he?
No, he's an atheist.
Pray for Tim Pool. Pray for Joel Berry. Pray for Auron MacIntyre.
MacIntyre.
MacIntyre. Pray for these guys not only to come to faith or grow in faith if the Lord has regenerated them, but that they would snap out of it, see the light, see the libertarian light. And I have a feeling each of these guys probably suspects that they've considered libertarianism before. And I've heard that kind of talk from from Kyle Mann and the Babylon Bee guys. And I'm not sure that's the case.
That's
Yeah.
seriously
Well, again,
considered.
there's both, and like if you go back and listen to the whole thing, there's times where both of them are like, because sometimes people can, if they don't have a sound philosophy, they don't have a sound epistemology, they can just kind of moral intuit sometimes their ways into saying something that on the surface is correct, but then they have to couch it and like back off of it because they don't have the correct backing for it, right? Like there's times where Joel was like correctly pointing out that Auron's kind of doing this thing where he's kind of being slippery with language and kind of drifting into this postmodern kind of woke way of approaching politics. So there's times where Auron's right for calling out Joel for being like, hey, you kind of like you're trying to appeal to like liberalism and to this idea of like liberty and limited government and all that and constitutionalism, but like like he points out all the ways where he's inconsistent in that. There's a point we didn't get to where it was a few minutes from where we stopped, where because I brought up the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, and he brings up that like one of the issues is that that the Anti-Federalists were right about is that like you can't have like the sort of cause and effect of like once people think that like their rights have to be enumerated, then that's a very slippery slope to our rights come from government, right? And that's one of the major issues that I think the Anti-Federalists were right about. And then the other part about like again there's this just glaring contradiction then on the other side with Joel, which is that he wants to have a limited republic but still be a global empire. And I'm like, even if I was a minarchist and I believed in the idea of a limited republic, and I'm like, well, you can't do both. You can't be a world empire and a limited constitutional republic. And even the founders, as imperfect as they were, knew this. Like James Madison said, like, we cannot be going around the world searching for monsters to destroy or we'll lose our soul. George Washington said that we should have trade with all and entangling alliances with none. So like they had glimpses of the truth, but like at the end of the day, I think what we've pointed to here is that everyone likes the idea of liberty until it's like it butts up against something that they don't like, and then they contradict themselves. And then when they contradict liberty, they create, just kind of in the same way that like fiat currency and money spending creates these bubbles in the economy. The minute you contradict yourself in philosophy and you go for, as you said, Kerry, pragmatism, then you create these kind of giant, these contradictions in your worldview create these giant distortions that lead to, everything we see right now.
Yeah.
I feel like if there are people listening to this that are sympathetic to a might makes right Machiavellian approach, those are people that we probably cannot as easily appeal to and have a discussion with. And so it's more naive, wannabe constitutionalists like Joel, I think, that are probably they need to do some more reading. You get plenty. I don't want to sound like one of those guys is like, do the reading, but it helps. It helps. You get through these discussions sounding less like a dum-dum. So let's recommend. Yeah, go ahead.
I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, I think they're more similar than they are different if you zoom out, because that's the point I was trying to get at. Like they're both doing the same thing. They're both going, I like liberty up until this point where people I don't like get to do things I don't like.
Right.
That's kind of at the end of that, like it's kind of the same.
And they can't, and we agree. We obviously don't like things that we don't like.
Right.
But we don't think coercion on principle. We think it's immoral and unjust to use coercion to stop them doing it unless the things we don't like are coercive.
Right.
So look, people, how do you differentiate when you can use coercion or not? It's when the things you don't like are themselves coercive.
Exactly.
Then you can use coercion to stop them. That clarifies.
Well,
other things you got to just, you got to move or just suck it up.
And in addition to that, it's not just people are doing things that I don't like. There is still a very strong sentiment that we can get to some sort of shining city on a hill, utopia or near utopia. That the point of government is to order society in such a way that everybody is flourishing, everybody is peaceful, everybody like conflict goes away, or it's easily solved by the system that they've set up. Like there's this idea that you can get to at least a near utopia. I don't think anybody would say, perfect utopia, but there is that idea. Whereas I think all of us from an anarchist perspective, we recognize that that's not achievable, right? That problems are going to come up and conflicts are going to come up. And that when you have a state, those things get magnified, right? So we have no illusions about what a stateless society would look like, and that it would take work and education and, knowledge and production and all of these things that isn't guided by some sort of central planner. And we have no expectation of reaching any sort of utopia. We're okay with that. Most people aren't.
No, I agree.
Well, so I was going to recommend that the people who want to be constitutionalists, who have bad foreign policy, go ahead and read Ron Paul's, is this showing the right way around?
Yep,
Yeah.
That's perfect.
A Foreign Policy of Freedom. What's the subtitle?
Peace, commerce, and honest friendship.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the book this Joel fella needs to read. And anybody in the audience who's listening who's like, oh, I thought I agreed with that guy.
And
You got to just read that book.
And I will say, to circle back, I'm a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. The last thing I came around on when I was following Ron Paul was his foreign policy, but I did come around to his foreign policy. I get it.
Yeah.
And covenant, a good book on covenant theology would help a lot of people too.
Oh, that's true. Start going to a good church that, believes a historically Protestant confession of faith, not one that, the church planting group wrote up or borrowed from Gospel Coalition.
Just because a nation state names it Israel doesn't mean that we owe it our undying support, right? Just like if I named my son Jesus Christ doesn't mean that you have to worship him.
If there's any connection.
In New Mexico, we call him Jesus.
Yes. Jesus the second. And you'd be like, I don't know. I feel like I should listen to this guy. I feel like I should do what he tells me.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Kerry and Greg, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for the audience for listening. If you want to support what we do, go to libertarianchristians.com/donate. Support the show, support the Institute, what we're doing, all the books, articles, and podcasts that we do. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I will be back here again next Monday night. So we usually always do a green room on Monday evenings. I've been doing more, on other evenings as well. Make sure you follow us. The best place to get, first of all, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You'll get notified of upcoming live streams. And then if you want to follow us on X at LCI Official for the LCI account, and I'm at Biblical Anarchy. And then you see Kerry and Greg there, if you're watching on the video, have their handles to follow them on social media. For Kerry, that's at Mere Liberty. And for Greg, you can follow Greg and Kerry's podcast at Refo Liberty. And of course, check them out at reformedlibertarians.com, right? With the S.
Yep, with the S.
Remembering that correctly. All right. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for listening. And we'll talk to you guys next time. Take care.